Hello and welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. With tourism levels at an all-time high, economic forecasts on an upward trend, and international credit agencies seemingly backing off, by all accounts, the economy was trending upward. But September 1st brought more than just a deadly monster hurricane. It meant the economy was now off the rails. The second and third largest contributors to the economy grind to a halt. Tourism arrivals took a nosedive, and millions of dollars had to be spent in the rescue and recovery. 4 months later, and the Hurricane Dorian costs continue to pile up. The government finds itself facing yet another fiscal headlock. My guest tonight is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, as well as a Member of Parliament for East Grand Bahama, the Honourable Peter Turnquest. Stay tuned. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. And we are back. When Peter Turnquest was appointed as the Minister of Finance, it was somewhat of a departure from the tradition of having the Prime Minister sit as the substantive Minister of Finance. It's rare that a Prime Minister abdicates the ministry to another cabinet minister so soon after coming to office. And since then, he has had to navigate some treacherous storms as the country's chief purse watcher. Hurricane Dorian has caused a lot of redistribution of priorities, and today we're going to talk about where we are with our economy and what Dorian has meant to our finances. Deputy Prime Minister, welcome again to On the Record.
Thank you, John.
We've been trying to get you on for quite a while. I know you've been busy, but we've got a lot to talk about today. Let's start, though, with how would you describe the state of our economy prior to the hurricane?
Prior to the hurricane, we were doing very well, respectfully. I think we were well on our target to meeting our fiscal projections. Our deficit to GDP was coming down in accordance with our fiscal plan, which we were very pleased about. And in fact, this year we were on track to beat our fiscal projection. So the economy generally was producing. As you know, tourism has been going gangbusters. Our financial services sector has somewhat stabilized. And the overall small, medium-sized enterprise sector has been gaining and growing very, very nicely. Very pleased what's happening there. So generally speaking, we were doing okay. We were seeing the gains and on target to meet our projected growth projections. Of course, as you know, things have been derailed. But, you know, again, we are not saddened or dejected or disappointed. We are picking ourselves up, refocusing our priorities, and recasting our forecast. And we've done it before, we'll do it again.
So prior to the hurricane, we were on that path, as you say, to reduce the country's long-term debt to 50% of GDP. In this post-Dorian era now, where does that put us in regards to reducing our deficit, which has always been, I guess, one of the key planks for your project, for the ministry, and one of the things that this government has been focused on, reducing the deficit. Where are we now as a result of that?
Right. So as you know, last year we passed our fiscal responsibility legislation that called for a specific deficit to GDP target for 3 years. And as I said earlier, we were well on our way towards that. The fiscal responsibility legislation does give us some flexibility in that we're able to make adjustments to the fiscal strategy once we are able to come to Parliament and explain why we have to make a departure and put forth the proposed solution or the path to getting us back to fiscal sustainability in the quickest time possible. So in this particular circumstance, we recognize that we have a situation where we're going to lose the revenue as a result of what's happened in Abaco and Grand Bahama. And in addition to that, because of the magnitude of the destruction, we are going to incur additional cost to support people in the first instance and to support the reconstruction effort. And so we have recast our fiscal strategy, which we laid in Parliament before the end of the year, last year. And basically what it calls for is that this year, whereas we had been projecting a 1% deficit to GDP, it's going to probably end up at 5.3% deficit to GDP.
And how does that affect, when you say that to the average person, what does that mean?
So whereas we had been anticipating that we would have had a fiscal deficit or a loss of 137 million, it's likely that this year we're going to spend more than we take in by 677 million. That difference being what we are going to spend, or what we projected to spend on hurricane recovery costs and to replace the lost tax revenue from these two jurisdictions. So what it means, generally speaking, is that we are continuing with our fiscal budget that we passed in May of last year, June of last year. However, we are recasting priorities. And so we will not obviously cut or tamper with social assistance programs, education, health, security. But everything else is pretty much on the table. Mm-hmm. Right? And so we have asked all of the ministries and agencies to look at their programs and their plans for the year, to see which of those is life and death, which of those are going to affect the quality of life or delivery of service for the public, and to see how we can scale back some of those.
Now, one of the things that you have been keen on from the very beginning has been a reduction in this level of borrowing.
Yes.
But you've had to come back to Parliament now. So where are we now with our borrowing? I know that you had set out to reduce that level.
Right.
But now, given the circumstances, people are asking how much more are we having to borrow, mm-hmm. and how, again, is that affecting the bottom line? So
this year, we are going to, unfortunately, end up having to go back to Parliament on the 29th to borrow somewhere around $507 million. Again, that is made up of two components. One, we anticipate that we have lost revenue as a result of the storm in Abaco and Grand Bahama of about $232 million. So we have to put that money back in the pot. So the only way to do it at this point is to borrow it. And then we have the additional cost for the reconstruction and support of the social system during this difficult period. So that'll make up the balance of that. What this borrowing will push our debt to GDP from around 60% to about 62%, which is going in the opposite direction that we obviously want to. But we are certainly doing our best, and we're hoping to be able to reduce that borrowing need just based upon the trends that we see currently, and our efforts to constrain discretionary costs. 62% still seems very, 60% is high, but 62% seems very high. Are there any, when I look at that, and I'm a non-financial person, I owe it to people, I'm a journalist. Right. 62% seems high. Yeah. And as a Bahamian, that raises a concern for me. Yeah. What is the government's concern, or is there a concern with that level? So the general rule is around, you get into danger when you hit 73% or thereabouts, particularly for small, vulnerable states like ours. So 62, 64% is worrisome. It's certainly something to be concerned about, but it's no need to panic. Our economy generally has been very resilient. and the fundamentals still remain intact. The beauty of our country is that where we have catastrophic loss in 2 of our islands, we still have the center, Nassau, still producing very well. Exuma is producing very well. Eleuthera is producing very well. So we still have the fundamentals of the economy producing very well.
I've got to get in this question before we go to our first break. Shortly after coming to office, this government increased value-added tax from 7.5% to 12%. Question that's been on my mind. Had you not done that, what kind of financial position would the country have found itself in?
Well, the reality is that we have amassed such a significant debt load, and we have an insatiable need for public spending as the public demands more and more services. And it's interesting to watch because, you know, the correlation between the government's ability to deliver services and tax revenue, you know, people miss that. The government doesn't print money. It only has relatively 2 sources, tax it or borrow it. People say grow the economy. And that's true, but you cannot grow the economy as quickly as the rising need for revenue, for demand for services. And so there's a gap there. And so you do have to end up borrowing, unfortunately. But we are doing our best to grow the economy through the various programs that we have instituted with the Small Business Development Center and trying to stabilize and to promote this whole business of entrepreneurship and the small medium-sized enterprise sector.
It's interesting you brought that up, and we're going to explore that a little bit more in our next segment, talking about ways and your plans to grow the economy and do some things differently. You're watching On the Record. Stay with us. Our discussion continues with the Deputy Prime Minister, but after this quick break. Welcome to On the Record.
Looking for more On the Record? If you miss our Thursday showing at 8 p.m., join us for the re-airing on Friday mornings at 10, and then again each Sunday night at 8:30. Or go to our YouTube channel and catch up on all of our past episodes. And then like our Facebook and Instagram pages for a preview of upcoming shows and get a chance to ask your questions. Just look for On the Record.
This portion of On the Record brought to you by Generali, your employee benefit solutions provider.
Welcome back. This segment is brought to you by Generali Insurance. It is estimated that it will take in excess of $4 billion to rebuild those storm-affected areas. With many other competing priorities, how will the government seek to rebuild and restore resilient communities destroyed by Hurricane Dorian? My guest is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the Honourable Peter Turnquest. Abaco, sir, was a significant contributor to the country's revenue column, with so much lost revenue, and as well as lost revenue from areas like East Grand Bahama. And now with the implementation of these tax-free zones, what kind of impact does this have overall? And I want to talk about Abaco specifically, which was a major contributor to revenue, to the tourism product. We've lost that completely. People in Abaco tell me they were the second economy.
Right. Well, you know, at this point, they might be right.
Yeah.
It is a significant loss for us. But fortunately, as I said earlier, the rest of the country has really picked up. And in fact, we're going to be laying the quarterly results, of the 6 months results, very shortly. And what it will tell you is that despite the loss in Abaco and Grand Bahama, that we have actually picked up revenue year on year. So that is
how is that possible?
Again, what we found is that you have a shifting of the tourism sector. Those persons who would have gone to Abaco and booked Abaco and Grand Bahama vacations have gone to other destinations within the Bahamas. And so we've benefited from that. Secondly, You remember last year we had a hybrid where the 12% VAT rate was delayed in its implementation to account for construction contracts that were ongoing and bookings at hotels that had been booked in advance and all of that. So now we have the full effect of the value-added tax increase. So that's helping. But generally speaking, we see an increase in cross-border taxes, trade taxes, customs duties, which tells us again that the economy is doing okay, that despite what has happened in the north, that other parts of the country are actually doing fairly well. It is also a reflection of our efforts to ensure that we are driving compliance amongst our importers in particular. With all of the improvements we've made to systems, with the electronic window of customs, the revenue enhancement unit that goes across all tax types as we try to ensure that everybody pays their fair share, if you will.
Small and medium-sized businesses really help to drive the economy. They're described in many instances as the engine. In Abaco's case, and again in East Grand Bahama, what's being done to help that sector rebound? A lot of small businesses and some medium-sized wiped out, no insurance, they've had to let people go. What's being done to try and get businesses back up and running? Because the reality is, if there's no business, there's nothing for me to go back home to.
Sure. And this is one of the really tragic parts of this storm, is the loss of businesses and that's resulted in the loss of employment for many Bahamians. And we certainly regret that. And so what we have done is we've set aside $10 million specifically to assist small and medium-sized enterprises to get back into business, whether that is repairing their infrastructure, whether that's restocking furniture, fixtures, whatever, to get them back into business as quickly as possible. In some areas it's a little more difficult than others because of the fact that the utilities and other infrastructure that they need to enable them to get back into business may be a bit delayed in getting up and going. But we're seeing more and more businesses starting to do the necessary to get their businesses back and opening. And those persons who would have been discouraged initially and basically throw their hands in the air, we're seeing them now start to turn around and the attitudes start to settle, where people are saying, well, okay, I was upset, disappointed, whatever, but now I can see a way to getting back into business.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, so we've put this $10 million, made this $10 million available through the Small Business Development Center, and we're doing a very short-circuited approval process to ensure that we get the money into the hands of these people as quickly as possible. That does not take away from the $5 million that we have for other startups that we had been in the process of in respect to supporting and capitalizing small businesses outside of those who are restoring from the hurricane.
Is that $10 million just a one-time, or are you looking to continue? Are you looking to add on to that, in future budgets or future allocations?
No, it is a one-time at this point, and hopefully we don't need it next year. But it is specifically designed to get existing or businesses that existed prior to the storm back into operation as quickly as possible, so that we have them start to re-employ people and have people move back to these islands and start to rebuild the economies.
A big part of the recovery will be the rebuilding of homes, businesses, even some of government's structures. What can we expect for the construction sector in relation to this rebuilding, and what can they look forward to in terms of getting a piece of the pie?
Sure. So what we see is a kind of a good conundrum, if you will, in that in Abaco in particular, there is tremendous need for construction skills. But the problem is that people have nowhere to live. And so getting back to the island and being able to contribute is a bit of a challenge, because if you don't have any place to live, you have no school for your children to go to, it's hard to go back to the island. But we're addressing that through the temporary shelters and the dome structures and all the rest of it that we're trying to put in place so that people can move back and start to engage. I suspect, given the insurance inflows, given the government assistance programs that are being finalized, that we're going to find that there's going to be a boom in construction in both these islands. Certainly in Abaco, we know that there's not enough skill, and so there's opportunities for Bahamians. People who may be in other islands that are maybe underemployed or they don't have enough work to engage, there's an opportunity in Abaco to go back and to help them to rebuild. The more hands we have, obviously, the quicker we can get it done. But again, we do have some limitations in respect to the infrastructure, the housing infrastructure that we have to solve. But, you know, I am actually kind of watching it with interest, because even though we expect that our growth rate projection for this year is going to slow, and I think we're projecting 0.6% growth this year, where we're projecting 2.2. I suspect that with the construction activity, we're going to see that growth, GDP growth number actually go higher than we expected.
In the last segment, you would have mentioned that, you know, you're asking the individual ministries and departments to look at areas that they can cut back. This week, however, there has been quite a bit of criticism for this increase in the government's travel budget, which even includes spouses. Why was that necessary at this time, particularly when you say you're asking other ministries and areas to cut back?
Sure. So let's put this in context. This is not a new thing. In fact, this issue was raised during the last administration, and there was a commission headed by Dr. Nottage, God rest his soul. And there was a report that was tabled in Parliament with respect to parliamentary allowances and salaries and all of that. We started having this conversation 2 years ago, because the reality is that if you are traveling to Europe or even in the US and in the Caribbean, you will realize very quickly that the per diem that was historical, which has not been changed for years, it was just not adequate. You couldn't survive on that, right? So we had a committee that looked at the whole situation and looked at the cost and tried to come to some reasonable numbers. The truth of the matter is that this is a very sensitive topic. It's a very emotive topic. It's unfortunate that it's raised again post-Hurricane Dorian. The public may want to know that, for instance, I saw something about the Admirals Club and the membership for members traveling, particularly international. International travel is grueling, particularly when you're getting up 4 o'clock in the morning and all the rest of it. But be that as it may, we have not applied or we do not have membership in the Admirals Club at this point. As a matter of fact, we depend upon the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Tourism to accommodate us. But, you know, again, we have to recognize that the cost has increased over the years. And while I am very sensitive to the fact that there are people who will say, well, you know, listen, you know, you get to travel. You should be happy, right? And you know, I'm trying to make ends meet. So it's hard to justify that. But at the same token, unfortunately, we live in a global community. We do have to travel. We do have to network. We do have to meet people. You know, as senior executives.
Sure, but Minister, given the timing, given the optics of all of this, was this a wise decision now? You're less than six months, outside of a major hurricane.
Sure.
And then you're talking about even including spouses.
Sure.
You know, it's the optics of it. Is this or was this the ideal time to do this?
Again, as I say, it's unfortunate that this was raised at this time because it has not been implemented. You will find, and I don't want to quote the number because I can't be sure at the moment, you will find that most people have not taken advantage of it. I know in my ministry, in fact, we were talking about this just the other day, that I haven't gotten any increase in my travel per diem. I don't have any Admirals Club membership. So you know, while it is a topic and while the Committee of Cabinet has agreed this, I think you will find in most ministries, and I can't say for all because I haven't looked at each and every one of them, you will find in most that those agreed increases have not been implemented. As I said, we just had this conversation the other day where a minister was saying, well, I didn't get this increase. So it has not, across the board has not been implemented, even though it has been agreed.
Well, let's see how it plays out. I just know a lot of people are angry about it because people are still hurting.
Sure.
People are without homes, with
Sure.
jobs, and then you hear ministers are getting a travel increase.
Sure. Again, I understand the sensitivity of this. I understand the emotions behind it. I don't blame Bahamians for being, angry or put off by it. If I were in their shoes, I'd feel the same way.
And this government, when in opposition, criticized the former administration for the large amounts being spent on travel.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to break down exactly what the travel is and how that money is being spent. And you will find that the circumstances are different, and the costs are different. But be that as it may, again, I understand the issue, and it is not one that certainly that we want to promote. My district, my constituency has been devastated. So for me to say that I need comforts and luxuries when my people are suffering in the cold, I can't support that. So I understand the sentiment.
Minister, we're going to take another break in our show. Stay with us. Our discussion continues right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true, and open debate they've been looking for.
And the icon goes to On the Record.
On the Record was born out of a desire to do something different. What we do every day helps our country, it helps our society, it helps to shape the views and opinions.
Gentlemen, we've got to move very quickly. Let's wrap up. It's all On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. You're watching On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. More than a week ago, the United Nations Development Program organized a private-public pledge conference. Out of that meeting, $1.5 billion was pledged for the rebuilding effort. One of the ministers on a panel at that conference to answer questions about the rebuilding effort was my guest, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the Honourable Peter Turnquest. Minister, did that conference do what it was designed to do? We came in, I happened to be a part of it in a small way, with a lot of high hopes about what would come out of it. Was government pleased, and was the United Nations Development Program pleased with what transpired at the conference?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, we were very pleased. We had some significant pledges of cash. We had pledges of in-kind services, and we had some financing offers. Generally speaking, I think that the entire conference was a success. It highlighted the needs to the international community, and we continue to receive offers of assistance in various forms as a result of, again, bringing this crisis issue to the table. As you know, climate change, or some say climate crisis, is a very hot topic. They were just discussing it in Davos at the World Economic Forum this week. And what we've been putting to the international community is that, the Bahamas is vulnerable. We are a low-lying nation, and so in a lot of respects, it puts us at the forefront of the issue. And what happens here has application all over the world, not only in small island states, but also in North America, because Florida is just as vulnerable as we are. And so what we've been saying to the international community is assist us. use this crisis as an opportunity to model out what resilience building looks like. And we've been trying to develop specific discrete projects that international donors can buy into. So whether that is underground utilities, whether that's solar and other alternative energy sources, whether that's building above ground or in a way that will deflect wind, that can stand surges 30, 40 feet, or not, about 30 feet. And the pressures that brings, whether it's financial resilience, how do we work around cash? Because one of the interesting observations from this storm is that people did the right thing and took out some cash for the storm in the event that power was lost. But the storm surge washed everything away. So even the couple of dollars they have, they couldn't, if there was anything to buy, they didn't have it. So financial resilience is a serious issue that we need to do some work on. And social resilience.
Do you think people understood, or was it communicated properly from the very beginning what these donations represented? You yourself said it was in cash, in-kind services, and even financing, a pledge to finance. Do you think people understood what this was all about and why these things are so important? People say, well, what can I do with in-kind services?
Sure.
You know, did people understand or get a full appreciation for what this was or is designed to do?
No, I think we need to do a better job in communicating exactly what was pledged and what that means. For instance, the United States made millions, I think it's 30 million or something, 50 million, I believe, of in-kind services. In other words, immediately after the storm, they brought materials, beds and blankets and tarps and water and all of these kind of things. And that has a value, right? We had NGOs that brought relief supplies. There's a value to that. At the conference, for instance, we had NGOs and private entities that offered to bring engineering services, town planning services, and to donate them to these communities. There's a value attached to that. This means that the government doesn't have to come up with that money to do that. We had the offer from the one major donor who offered concessionary financing for government projects in a PPP kind of arrangement. And we're looking at that. It doesn't mean that we have to accept it, that we have to take it, but we're looking at it because if the interest rate is right and the project is right and the terms can be worked out where they're beneficial to us, we look at it as we look at any other private public partnership.
You brought that up because that's my next question. This $970+ million pledge from the P3 group was met with fierce criticism and a lot of skepticism. Why? What happened?
So I think, politics has a lot to play with it. Unfortunately, the opposition, rather than being supportive of what we're trying to do here in the rebuilding of these islands, take the opportunity to take a shot.
But I saw ordinary people as well
no, absolutely.
who were
and I think
skeptical.
And the issue there is that, again, there's a misunderstanding. What that P3 group offered is concessionary financing. It's along the same lines that we take concessionary financing from the IDB, and not to put them in the same group, but the IDB or the World Bank or any of these multilateral kind of lending institutions. They offer us financing at a lower rate. In this particular circumstance, the P3 group is saying, listen, we have access to capital of $900 million or whatever it was. And we are willing to partner with you, the Bahamas, to access that financing at a concessionary rate. And I think, if I remember correctly, in my brief conversation with the gentleman afterwards, somewhere around 3% they were talking about lending us this money for these projects. And these projects would be of the type of project that we are used to now with these public-private partnerships. And the government has set up last year a public-private partnership policy, which basically says that we will enter into or make ourselves available for public-private partnerships where there is a return, meaning that the facility or the infrastructure has a commercial aspect to it, where we can get a return on the money to pay back whatever the financing is. And so it's not to be seen as borrowing, because it's not borrowing. It is completely off balance sheet for the Bahamas.
And I think it came up, this does not go against our government debt.
No, it does not go against government debt. This is completely off our books. It is a public-private partnership. It means that the person comes, they use their capital to build an agreed infrastructure project. The infrastructure project should be self-sustaining, meaning it has some kind of revenue stream that will be used to pay back this financing to the
So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
That's
whatever
the
business, and the revenue from it pays back the loan.
That's the ideal. And at the end of the financing term, the project reverts to the government. The ownership reverts to the government. There are opportunities for non-revenue generating public-private partnerships. Those we would prefer to be domestically driven. And those projects would only be interesting to us where, again, the financing cost of it is below market rate.
Minister, I've got to ask you, does the fallout from this show that there is a trust deficit with the government?
That is unfortunate. That has been building for years over successive governments. The truth of the matter is that there is such a cynicism and skepticism about government that trying to rebuild that trust is a serious challenge for us. It is why we have tried to put in place measures like the fiscal responsibility legislation, the regular reporting that we do of the financial numbers, why we are putting forth a procurement legislation so that there's transparency around that, trying to put in place the basic elements of trust so that people can say, well, okay, they may not be doing what I want them to do, but at least they're honest and they're telling us what they're doing.
But Minister, how much of that do you think your government has contributed to? When you look at, let's even start with the value-added tax. I mean, that came blindsided all of us. Nobody knew it was really happening until it came to Parliament. And then you have things like the O-Ban deal, which is still sort of out there in deep space. Nobody quite understands what's happening. But how much of that do you take responsibility for?
Well, again, the value-added tax situation is kind of a unique situation in that it has, because of the significance of it and the revenue implications of it, we had to be careful with it, not only in the domestic sense, but also in the international sense. But again, we were very careful and deliberate to make sure that we explained completely our rationale and how it benefits the Bahamian people in the long term. The other issue, I really don't have anything to contribute to it at this time. But
do you understand why people feel the way that they feel?
Sure, and as I say, this has been building for years. I mean, it would be unfair to say that this government is the cause of this distrust. And we have to work harder to regain, as a government, not as our government per se, but as governments, we have to work harder to regain that trust so that people feel, people perceive that the government is working in their best interest. And it's a tall order. We can do better.
That's a long road, sir. I have to tell you that
Absolutely.
People distrust a lot of what what governments are telling them. Even sometimes sitting on the show, people will say to me, "Did you believe what you were what you were being told?"
I fully understand it.
It is an uphill battle, and you have to admit that things that you all have done have not helped that.
We've made some mistakes, and I think we'll all admit that if we're not perfect. For a lot of us, it's been a bit of a steep learning curve, but we're getting there, and I think we're doing better. I think that one of the things that we have tried very hard to do is to be as transparent and upfront as we can.
Well, that's an uphill battle, like I said. Well, sir, we've got a final segment. Stay with us. Our program will continue right after this.
Matt, where in the world is Matt Lauer? Where in the world is Ellison Greenslade? And so it's about the low value of cottage in Atlanta. So we can talk about it.
More on the record tonight, the government's purchase of the Grand O'Kine is a hot subject in the news. We're going to Welcome now to our final segment. My guest is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Peter Turnquest. So with so many homeowners and businesses uninsured, now having to rely on the government, we talked about that $10 million that's being made available to small and medium-sized businesses. These folks, as well as homeowners, now have to rely on government and donations to rebuild. What are we going to do to address this insurance issue? People simply cannot afford insurance.
Sure. This is a significant issue that is being recognized throughout the region. In fact, late last year, I was at a conference in Barbados where this was one of the key elements. And basically, the thinking now is that, well, first off, we expect that there's going to be some increase in insurance rates throughout the region as a result of the last storm that hit Dominica, this one that has wiped out Abaco and Grand Bahama, or parts of Grand Bahama, that there's going to be some level of increase in the reinsurance rates, which translates into higher premiums for us. The way that we're thinking to address this is, one, to ensure that we revise the building codes to take into account these stronger storms and the prediction for more frequent storms. To ensure that the building codes are in fact enforced.
That's a big issue.
It's a huge issue. And if you look at a lot of the failures that happened, it's because the building code just was not followed. So we have to do some quality control in respect to the inspections, in respect to the construction work, and the materials that are being used to ensure that they actually meet the building codes. We also have to look at other ways to incentivize individuals to take up insurance. And so for one of the things, for instance, we were thinking about is that if we say to residents, look, if you were to take insurance and you can prove that you have coverage, then maybe we can give you a break on your real property tax, for instance, or some kind of discount mechanisms to use incentives to try and get people to take up this insurance.
You've got to alleviate that because people just simply cannot afford it.
Absolutely, it is a huge burden. And so, you know, as a defensive mechanism for the government, while we may give up some revenue, if we can incentivize and stimulate people to go out and get the insurance, it is to our long-term benefit.
Well, sir, we certainly will be looking forward to that, to see if that comes to the fore, because that's a very significant issue. I want to talk a little bit about the area that you represent, East Grand Bahama, one of the areas really badly hit in the storm, parts of Freeport as well, but East End Grand Bahama really took a beating. What's happening, I want to talk about what's happening in those communities, particularly when we talk about the utilities. These utilities are run by private companies. You know, what is there a guarantee that they are going to restore those utilities to those communities in an instance where they may not be profitable?
Sure. So thank you, Jerome. And this is an area that is very sensitive to me because while we pay a lot of attention to Abaco and the destruction there, as you say, East Grand Bahama, the eastern part of the constituency, has certainly taken equally as bad a hit, though the population is less, but no less significant in terms of the loss. Unfortunately, the cost of running utilities out to the east end of the island and onto Sweetings Key and onto Waters Key is expensive. And as a private entity, the utility companies are looking at it from a profit return perspective. But we have been consistently saying to them, not only do you have a profit or should have a profit motive, but you also have a moral, social, community responsibility as the sole utility on the island, and having the franchise to provide this service. Fortunately, we have seen in the last couple of weeks a rethinking, a new look at it. And the utility company, the electrical company, has consented that they will build back some of those lines. Right now, they have indicated that they will build a temporary plant at Statoil in the east and work back towards the west, which is the more populated parts of the constituency, or the eastern part of the constituency. We still have to find a solution for Sweetings Key and from McLeanstown and down to Pelican Point. And the thinking at the moment is to drop a standalone generator in those communities to power those communities for the time being while the main transmission lines are reestablished. There's also talk about solar grids, microgrids, so that these communities become self-sufficient, so that in the event of storm they can be dismantled and stored and then put right back up immediately after. That is a very attractive option for us. It's costly, unfortunately, and so I think this is why the power companies decided that they will put back the main transmission line for the time being. But long term, there's no doubt that the solution is some kind of microgrid.
If the utility companies, and I'm talking about power and water, if they determine that they're not going to carry service back, what is government going to do? Do you now have to step in and provide, will you step in and provide those services?
We have an obligation to the people in these constituencies, just as we have an obligation throughout the Bahamas. Unfortunately, and this is one of the challenges that BPL has had, it has to provide services to some very far-flung communities. But those persons deserve that service. And so it's a shared cost throughout the country. And hopefully, it doesn't come to that. But in the event that there is no, the private company decides that they don't want to put back full service, and we can't find a microgrid kind of solution that is palatable and affordable for the residents, then the government is going to have to step in.
I understand that I think there are 4 schools in East Grand Bahama that were damaged. Of those 4, only 1 is going to be rebuilt. Is that correct? And what will happen?
So the current thinking is that we will not rebuild any of the existing schools, that we will build one central school in the district that will be able to accommodate all of the students throughout that area. Sweeting Ski being a little different in that we want to ensure that the young kids, the babies, don't have to travel across that sometimes dangerous stretch of water. But we believe that by centralizing it, we'll be able to provide a more comprehensive and quality educational experience for those students, and while keeping them within their community. I believe the Ministry of Education is still working out the details of that. But the thinking at the moment is that there would be a central school.
Very quickly, any timeline on when that will happen?
September is coming, it's not going.
Yeah, right. Okay, good to know. So I want to just flip to you a few questions from some of our viewers. We've asked them, we announced you were coming on the show, and we asked people to submit questions. This question came to us from Theo Teddy Dawkins. He says, I understand the government is facing cash shortfalls. Why isn't there any emphasis being placed on harvesting our national resources in order to bring Bahamians up? Also, with the trillions of dollars of trade and goods moving through Bahamian waters and airspace, why isn't there a tax placed on the movements?
Yeah, so as you know, the government has been working with respect to the airspace for several years now. Mm-hmm. The minister responsible indicates that we are closer than we've ever been, and we're hoping to be able to kick that over, because admittedly, we've been hearing closer than we've ever been for a little while. So hopefully we'll be able to kick that over very shortly. We are revising and implementing some innovative technological solutions with respect to yacht charter businesses and its cruising permits and that. So hopefully we will be able to recognize some revenue from that sector that we have not had before. So that'll be new revenue, and it doesn't tax Bahamians, it taxes the visitor. And so hopefully we'll get that going very shortly. In fact, we expect to sign a contract within the next week, 2 weeks at the most, to have that going. In respect to resources, there's still this conversation about aragonite and what it could mean for the Bahamas in terms of a material. And we've had some studies early on in the administration with respect to this, and while the study indicates that there is potential for increased revenue from this activity, that it is not what people have been estimating it to be. And we've had several town meetings about this in various districts, and one of the conflicts that we have is that there is a bit of a competition between the environmentalists, the fishers, and these persons who want to extract the product, and trying to find that balance so that no one is disadvantaged is a bit of a complicated process that needs more study, needs more consultation before we come to a conclusion on it.
I'm sure it's a lot more complex than that, given the fierce advocacy of a lot of our environmental groups. Sure. This other question coming in from one of our viewers, says the government should be more collaborative with the private sector and citizens in moving policy forward, particularly with regard to improving the economy, so that people from the bottom, up feel it. Also, a question about whether or how will government get more young professionals involved in this rebuilding process and just in moving the country forward?
Sure. So last year, we, for the first time in developing our budget, we had detailed conversations with various sectors of the economy, where we had these groups come in and talk to us about their concerns. We explained our situation and what we were thinking. That went very, very well. This year, we anticipate doing the same. In fact, I'm meeting with the Chamber of Commerce later on today, where we'll talk about the broad strokes of what we are seeing in terms of the economy and how it's going, and our prospects for the medium to long term, what that may mean in terms of policy, and solicit their ideas, their suggestions as to how we ought to look at these challenges, with the overall goal, again, of increasing the participation of Bahamians in the economy for the maximum benefit of Bahamians. In respect to young Bahamians in particular, as you know, the government has had a program launched where we are engaging young people, particularly from UB, to come into the government service. So the government service becomes a training ground for them, but also to take from them their energy, their ideas, their innovative approaches to things that may improve government and the services that we deliver and how we deliver those services. And then the Small Business Development Center itself is another incubator for the talents of these young people. We have projects that are coming forward that are completely out of traditional thinking. And as I've always said when I launched this program, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those young Bahamians who have ideas, who have gone off and qualified themselves, that have gotten experiences that me and you, as young as we are, still believe is impossible in the Bahamas. But these people have ideas, and they have qualified themselves to be able to take advantage of these opportunities, particularly for export into the global market.
We're
going to support them.
Another final question from a viewer. The announcement of BPL's rate reduction bond struck controversy immediately as it was released, that the $37 will be added to each customer's monthly bill. Bahamians see it as another hit to their pockets and another form of taxation. What is the rationale behind this rate reduction bond, and how is it projected to impact BPL customers? So
the first thing is that we have to recognize that BPL did not get into the mess that it was in just yesterday. We prior to the installation of these new engines, BPL had been limping along with engines that were over 30 years old, 40 years old, and just were reaching their end of life. It's unfortunate that over those period we did not have a replacement program in place, so that the cost of replacement would not have been all hit all at once. But that has happened, and there's nothing we can do about that. We have to address the issue today that confronts us today. And that solution costs money. We've had to replace, I think it's 5 engines. It's expensive, but it is necessary to avoid what happened last summer with all the blackouts and the brownouts, and what that meant to the economy, what that meant to individual families in terms of loss of appliances and all the rest of it. So that money has to come from somewhere. BPL has been a cash-strapped agency for years, and it suffered from some very, very bad decisions that had been made in previous iterations or boards of that institution. But it set us on a path, and again, we have to address it. So BPL, as a standalone quasi-government agency, has to pay its way. If it doesn't, then it means that the taxpayer has to pay it. All right, and so the rate reduction bond was one way for them to be able to generate the funds that they needed in order to acquire these engines and to make the upgrades. They got to pay it back though, and so rather than increasing the base rate for that, they decided that, listen, We don't want a long-term rate increase. What we want is to be able to recover the cost of financing these engines. And so the rate reduction fee is to be applied to that cost, to pay down that loan or that bond to pay for these engines. And so the minister has given an outline that the rate reduction portion of the bill will have an end life. It will end at some point, and the overall cost of energy will come down as a result of the efficiencies of the engines, as well as the end or the maturity of this loan.
Mm-hmm. And so, Minister, we could have a whole separate discussion on BPL, but
sure.
Unfortunately we are out of time. But I want to, first of all, thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us today and giving us a clearer snapshot of where we are in this post-Hurricane Dorian era, and helping Bahamians to understand what are some of the challenges, but certainly answering some of the questions that are on the minds of so many of us. So thank you very much, sir, and all the best to you. We'll certainly be talking to you again in the future to see how things are shaping up.
Thank you very much, and as I close, I just want to say to those people in East Grand Bahama that we have not forgotten them, that we are in fact working towards restoring those communities, providing opportunities for them to get back into their homes and into business, which is critically important to the overall health of the Bahamas.
And that's important because sometimes they do feel like they've been forgotten, so thank you for that. We also like to thank our viewers for sharing those questions with us. We invite you to continue to follow us on social media as we tell you week to week what we will be discussing, and we invite you to certainly get in on our discussion by sending our questions to you, and we'll do our very best to get them to our guests. Well, that's going to do it for us today. I want to thank so very much my guest for coming in today, the Honourable Peter Turnquest, and sharing all that information with us. Also to my technical team, and of course to you. We look forward to having you again and seeing you again next week. But until then, stay tuned via our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, right here on The Record.